Good morning. My name's Martin Field. I am the Vice Chair of the Regions on the ULI UK District Council. The ULI is a global think tank, non-profit and, more important, non-lobbying. Although this is a sort of party political week, and this is our first interaction really with the political scene in the UK, we do like to stress that we don't lobby. That's very important for us. We're completely apolitical. As I said just earlier there, we've had 6 events, but 3 themes for us, and we consider the knowledge economy, the competitiveness of knowledge, the providers of knowledge is one of the most important factors for any city and city region. We've covered transport and we've covered housing, and this is, again, from a worldwide conversation, probably the most important sector that we're engaged with at the moment. I must thank the sponsors. I got into trouble yesterday and I noticed their banners up, so I will definitely do that, and I know one of them is in the room. So very much thank you to College International for providing the breakfast this week, Wilmot Dixon for supporting us across many different areas, and RJF Public Affairs for helping us with content. As I said earlier, the ULIs, we have 30,000 members around the world, and we're represented in 95 countries, so we're a truly global player. And we're quite pleased that our sort of first foray out of London and Europe is in Birmingham in the Midlands. We set up a Midlands committee about 12 months ago, and there's 1 or 2 of the members in the room. A gentleman called Adrian Bland is the chairman from Rag & Co, and you may have heard of Rag & Co, but so they're doing a grand job, so we're very pleased with that. We think that Birmingham and the Midlands is probably one of the most exciting cities outside of the capital. We haven't based our first operation outside of London for no reason at all. So we're very excited about the various things that are going on. I'm not going to introduce the panel. But what we do have is we have Bill Kistler, who is the ULI Trustee, former Chief Exec and Chief Operating Officer for all of Europe and the Middle East. He's going to kindly moderate for us this morning, so welcome Bill, coming to Birmingham for us. That's excellent, your 24-hour experience. And I think really that's probably, I will hand over to you now, Bill, I think, if you're happy with that. So thank you very much for coming, it's really much appreciated.
Thanks very much, Martin. And this isn't my first time to Birmingham. I was just telling Professor Eastwood that I have a son at UOB, so this is a city that's very near and dear to my heart. I've been here, I think for the first time maybe 15 years ago, and I've watched the city transform during that time. I've been, frankly, in awe at the achievements you've made over that time, but as I look towards the future, as I look at the challenges that you face and that cities like Birmingham face around the world, it's time to pause and look at your options going forward. I think knowledge, the subject of this morning's conversation, the connection between higher education, between cities, city government, and between the business community is fundamental to that future. And I think Birmingham is in a unique position in the UK and potentially among a very few cities in the world to capitalize on this notion of creating a more attractive, more vibrant knowledge city. So we've assembled, thanks to Martin and ULI here in Birmingham, a very interesting panel this morning to discuss and debate that challenge, what needs to be done looking forward. We have Professor David Eastwood, who, as Martin said, no need of introductions, but as Vice Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, but not only that, this year's chair of the Russell Group, which, as most of you know, is the, I think, 20 universities?
24 now.
24 universities, leading universities in the UK, has a perspective beyond Birmingham of this challenge. He sits on numerous boards, including the Birmingham, Greater Birmingham and Solihull LEP. So he has a broad perspective on this question. David Hardman represents the business community as the CEO of the Birmingham Science Park Aston. He's a microbiologist by training, but he has a great perspective on what it takes to attract and nurture a knowledge-based business, and has been doing that in Birmingham since, I think, 2008, David? So look forward to hearing your perspective. And finally, Wouter Schuitemaker is the investment director of Business Birmingham, and in that sense is here to represent the city's perspective, what it takes to attract inward investment, what it takes to sell the city of Birmingham on the global stage, on a very competitive stage. So they will each make a 5-minute kind of introductory. We've given Professor Eastwood a few extra minutes, a 5 to 10 minute introductory set of remarks, which will then, I will try and provoke a discussion, a debate, to challenge. We'd like to draw you in, so we will get started and then reach out to you. If you have questions, we'll have the opportunity to answer those. Just a couple of comments before we kick off the panel. I think we had a warm-up last night over dinner, and there's some people in the room who were at that dinner where we discussed some of the same points that are on the agenda today. And it was very interesting to hear the diversity of opinion. I think at the crux of what we're discussing is the importance of higher education, whose role it is, whose responsibility it is to create the skill sets and talent that the business community needs, and then the role of the city in first attracting the students that then become graduates and then become part of the workforce, and then retaining them as viable, high-skilled talent for the companies and the investment you're trying to attract to Birmingham. And it is kind of a chicken and egg debate, and the importance of place, the importance of opportunity, the importance of being able to provide jobs for those graduates are all critical to the future of Birmingham. Last night we worked ourselves into a bit of a funk at the end of the evening where we were focused on, I think, the negatives, all the challenges, how competitive the world is, how things have changed since 2009, and how, in many ways, the future looked bleak. And as a not infrequent visitor to Birmingham, but somebody who's certainly not living it day to day as most of you are, I said, look, I'm very much the optimist. The glass is half full. And in that regard, I think you stand looking forward at similar challenges to those you faced 15 or 20 years ago. This is not a time to be complacent and rest on your accomplishments. If anything, if you don't make the right steps over the next few years to continue the trajectory that Birmingham's been on, I think you risk falling into the kind of decline you faced a generation ago. That said, you have all the assets. You have the raw materials to be a globally competitive city. And I think on that note, I will hand over to you, David, to kick it off.
Bill, thanks very much. Indeed, great pleasure to be here this morning. I apologise for my voice. It's not an affectation, it's an affliction. Really important theme. And what I want to do is, in a sense, sketch two things. One is give you some impression of the way in which UK universities as a whole are contributing to driving a high-tech, R&D intensive knowledge economy, and also give you some worked examples from my own university, the University of Birmingham. Let's just start with a few numbers. In 2010-11, UK universities contributed 3.3 billion to the economy through services to business. Those included the commercialisation of new knowledge, the delivery of professional training, consultancy and services. 3.3 billion, that's up 7% on the figure for 2009-10. So we're not exactly recession-proof businesses, but we are continuing to grow our activity and our commercial activity during the downturn. Those are good numbers. They come from the Higher Education Funding Council survey. I used to run the Higher Education Funding Council, so I can vouch for the authority of the numbers. As I was saying to Bill, you need to remember that 63% of statistics are made up. Just think about it. But universities, of course, are businesses in themselves. My own university, University of Birmingham, this year will have a turnover just shy of £500 million, a £500 million business. And of course we have a major impact. On the standard measure, the impact of the University of Birmingham on this city is about 800 million, but we're doing a survey which we will publish in March to update that. The standard calculation now for the economic impact of universities across the UK is of the order of £65 billion. So we operate in partnership, we operate through the services that we provide, but we are, of course, ourselves major drivers of business. And there was a group at the back of the room just talking about, as it were, who's hiring the cranes in this city at the moment in construction. And the position of construction in the city of Birmingham would be very different if the universities in this city weren't actually investing in their estates. What then of new businesses and what then of spin-out? And I want to preface what I say here by dealing with an issue which has cropped up again recently, that universities have a restrictive approach to knowledge, a restrictive approach to their IP, and this is some sort of drag on development. I think nothing could be further from the truth. My own university is a part of a worldwide consortium now called Easy IP, where we give away IP free. University College London's in that consortium, University of Glasgow and some other UK universities, universities in the Far East and in Australia. And for us, the judgment around commercialisation is how is it best done? If it's best done by us through spin-out, we'll do it that way. If it's best done through a licensing arrangement, we'll do it that way. We have an embedded venture capitalist organisation within the university. If it's best done that way, we'll do it that way. And if it's best handed over, we will hand it over. So we're well aware that quite a lot of the resource base, quite a lot of the research base of our university is ultimately publicly funded, and we will share that appropriately. But there are times when the most appropriate strategy for commercialisation is spin-out. In the last year for which numbers are available, 2010-11, some 268 new spin-out businesses were established from the UK's universities. And this takes the number of active spin-outs from UK universities to a shade under 1,300, employing over 18,000 and with a turnover of nearly 2.1 billion. The portfolio of spin-out companies based on on intellectual property from my university is worth about 200 million. So I think you can see that this is significant business for us, but it is a significant driver in the not just the regional economies, but the national economy. We have our own a not-for-profit organisation, Ultra Innovations, which oversee our spin-outs. We run jointly with Birmingham City Council the research park, which is located between us and the hospital, and that complements the research park that David runs and we'll speak to later on. We also work collaboratively, and one of the best examples of collaboration for my university is the Science City Research Alliance, SCAR, where there was a major investment in the universities of Birmingham and Warwick around three key areas: advanced materials, energy and translational medicine. That funded new facilities on both our campuses. It enabled us to embark on global hires in order to drive development in these areas, and we're now really halfway through the funded period of the Science City Research Alliance. What have we achieved? We've achieved £65 million worth of new research, over £3 million worth of business engagement, 250 new jobs, 110 new research collaborations, 670 trained staff, 20 new patents and 9 businesses generated so far. So for us, a part of what we do is freestanding. It's the University of Birmingham, operating against the University of Birmingham. A part of what we do is through collaboration. Some of those are structured and funded collaborations, as with Science City. Some of those are collaborations that we ourselves initiate. Our own collaboration with the University of Nottingham is well known. And crucially, of course, we have major and long-standing business collaborations. And let me insofar as commercial confidentiality allows. Let me give you one example of the University of Birmingham's commercial partnerships, and that's with our colleagues at Rolls-Royce. We have a long-standing university technology partnership with Rolls-Royce, and that partnership goes back over 20 years. And it's through that partnership that you develop a common understanding, a common trust, the ability to share business problems, the ability for us to work with the business to develop business solutions. On the back of that, jointly with our colleagues at Nottingham and Loughborough, we established the Manufacturing Technology Centre at Anstey. Rolls was the key anchor partner in that. There are now 39 major business partners at the MTC collaboration, and that's continuing to grow. That was initially a £40 million high-value manufacturing centre, which is a unique facility in the UK. It's already delivered 140 new jobs and supports indirectly and directly over 100 businesses. And then some of you will have heard on Monday the Chancellor announced a new investment jointly between government and Rolls-Royce in a high-temperature fabrication facility jointly between the University of Birmingham and Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce are investing 40 million in that new centre. That was signed off by Rolls-Royce main board in advance of a main board meeting. So important was the collaboration to the company. So you can see there that what you end up with is a long-standing strategic relationship, which from the point of view of my university determines the pattern of hires. It determines where we focus parts of our research around advanced manufacturing and fabrication. And it's a key part of the university's strategy for the future. I said to a senior board member of Rolls-Royce, I know how this works, that if we don't deliver, you go shopping for a new university partner. And he said, David, you don't know how wrong you are. If you don't deliver, the planes fall out of the air. These are very serious partnerships. And you can parallel those sorts of partnerships into biotech, and in our case, in the partnerships we have with trusts across the city, notably but not exclusively, University Hospital Birmingham. And jointly with them, we are establishing an Institute of Translational Medicine, again, working with and through the LEP. Some 12 million has been levered into that investment through the City deal, and that will be critical to taking forward translational research in key areas, including cancer, immunology, infection, and chronic disease. For us too, the collaborations don't stop in the UK. Our university now has a major centre in Guangzhou in South China. And through that, we are not just working with the city authority, the city government of Guangzhou, and with leading universities in Guangzhou. We are also now working with major companies in South China, and we believe in the not too distant future, not only would there be co-investment in China, there will be co-investment in Birmingham. That gives you some indication of the reach and leverage of universities and their ability to attract inward investment. It's sometimes said, of course, that universities do all sorts of things. But we are ivory towers, and we don't train and develop the next generation of entrepreneurs. I don't want to get drawn too closely into this because there's a deeply theological debate about whether you can teach entrepreneurship. What you can do is produce enterprising graduates, and that's what we at the University of Birmingham seek to do. In the UK as a whole, from the graduating classes of recent years, nearly 3,000 new businesses have been created by enterprising graduates capitalising on the knowledge and experience they gained at universities. We've increased by 50% our investment in the employability of our graduates, and we are seeking to infuse all of our programmes with skills which will ensure that our graduates, amongst other things, are highly enterprising graduates. We also partner in novel ways. This year, jointly with KPMG, we've taken the first cohort of students who will be studying a joint programme at the University of Birmingham with KPMG. They will graduate with BSc Honours in Accounting and Finance, and over a 5-year period in which they'll have their tuition paid by KPMG, they'll be employed by KPMG, they will emerge both as graduates of the university and as qualified accountants. That's a partnership with KPMG, and it's a partnership that we can replicate with other major businesses. So I hope what you get is a sense of a university which takes its responsibility to not just to the research base seriously, but its responsibility to R&D and to commercialisation of that knowledge seriously. I hope you have a sense of a university which recognises our privileged position in producing precisely the kind of skilled, capable and enterprising graduates that the city needs. I was asked earlier about the pattern of our recruitment. We recruit 25% of our students from the Greater Birmingham area. So 3/4 come from outside Birmingham. 49% get their first jobs in this city. 5 years on, about 35% are still here. So we are a net importer of skilled people into the city region. The city is pretty successful in holding them in the first instance, but there is some leaching away over time. That's something that I think we collectively need to think about and to reflect on, because our soft focus group work suggests that many of those don't wish to leave the city. They enjoy life here, they enjoy the amenities of this great city, but it's career opportunities that take them away, and that's a sober reflection, I think. So there you are, a city which is poised, I think, to move forward. A university, one of the city's universities, which takes its responsibility to the city and its economy deeply seriously. I describe the University of Birmingham as open for business. I hope you've seen from what I've said that the University of Birmingham is open for business. And I do believe that through these kinds of partnerships that we will make our contribution to recovering the rate of growth that we need in this city and ensuring that a fine city has a still greater future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And I think you've touched on many of the themes that we will continue in our conversation between the panelists. I've asked Dr. Hardman to follow and give you the perspective from the other side of the table, from the receiving end, the business community.
Other side of the table and other side of town as well, but one town. I just want to pick up on one of the last comments that Dave just made, which is this issue of graduate retention, which those sort of percentages are good numbers, I think. But some recent data looking at across the US at what is the links between high growth businesses over a 30-year period across the US, and not just in the cluster areas, but even in what is defined as the Rust Belt, was actually skills. And the university graduates was the closest thing that linked the number of high growth businesses and the successes of those businesses. It wasn't patents, it wasn't research, it was the skills, graduate skills. So that's an important aspect of this, and we need to keep the best graduates in Birmingham to drive the economy. In the title, there's the second bit to it is a question, and I think the answer has to be, there's no choice, it has to be yes, because the future driven across the board, across all sectors, innovation and the knowledge development is crucial. That whether it's for longevity of companies, if you look at some of the oldest manufacturing companies in the region, the reason they're still here is they have continually innovated their activities, their products, their services. So that's an important aspect. Driving the knowledge economy is the triple helix of the public sector, the private sector, and the universities. You know, a place like Birmingham, with the largest unitary authority, 5 universities, and a history of engineering, manufacture, and commercial things of the workshop of the world, we should be leading the way. The question is, are we? I think the answer possibly is, in some instances, absolutely, in other areas, not. Those where we're not, I think it's because the triple helix is not working together. It's working in parallel. And I think there's some work to be done in driving those three elements together to work more effectively all the time. Driving the knowledge economy, ideas, skills, and funding. Funding not just for the research, which is crucial, and the universities are bringing, as we just heard, a lot of money into the region for that. But there's also the need for the funding for the early stage businesses, and we need to convince the investment community to look beyond the Greater South East. And that is something that Birmingham has to work out. The economy is changing. So the way in which we support that economy has to change. And looking back to see what was successful 10 years ago to actually support the future businesses is, I think, the wrong approach. We have to look at different ways of doing it. Birmingham has been successful in the past because of connectivity. Connectivity of transport, of supply chains. Today, in the knowledge economy, the connectivity is digital. It's the fibre connections that will allow the supply chains to work. If we're going to look at that, then the whole interest in smart, digital, connected cities is absolutely crucial, and the city is working on that. But it needs to be a real driver, and it needs to be joined up. You can have talent in a street in Birmingham and 2 streets across, related or complementary talent, not knowing that it's there. It's buried in the city. We have to find a way of connecting that talent. Fibre is going to be helpful, even 2 streets away. At a press of a button, you can be 2 streets away, or you can be the other side of the world. And that's a theme that we've been developing at the Science Park, is actually to bring technology, funding, experience, and very likely funding and experience being the key ones, to Birmingham, virtually as well as physically. And you can do things much faster then. If you think of the clusters around the world, they've taken 20, 30, 40 years to catch fire. The reason being you have to import people. Well, if you've got the ideas and you're lacking the CEOs or the finance directors or whatever, you can bring them these days without physically moving them. It's much cheaper, much faster. So the Science Park Without Walls theme, which is something we've been developing, I see as sort of a crucial element to this. So finally, in terms of the Science Park itself, we're actually not quite unique. There's one other in the country. But we're rare in that we're owned by the City Council, which actually gives us a focus on economic regeneration using the knowledge economy than perhaps it does on technology translation, although obviously the two go hand in hand. So what I'm hoping to see at the Science Park in coming out of the ground, I hope, next year, is a statement about the digital agenda in Birmingham, a place where you can come and connect physically with the individuals, with the creative minds that are setting up these new businesses, and with the world to bring the skill sets in. The universities are crucially important to this, but possibly in another way that, coming back to the graduates. Our Entrepreneur for the Future programme, which was set up in November 2009, has now set up 61 businesses. Not one of them is based on intellectual property out of any of the universities in the region. Now, I'd like to put that right, but it's an interesting statement that the graduates are setting up these businesses, and there's a whole slew of interesting opportunities that are developed out of that. So I think the opportunity is there. I still think we have to grasp it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And we have now, last but not least, Wouter for the perspective from the city.
Thanks, Bill. Firstly, a sort of a thank you to Martin. Martin gave me the choice a couple of weeks ago of a dinner or a breakfast, and I plumped for the breakfast. And next thing I know, I'm on a panel. So maybe I should have gone for the dinner. But I think this is a good point in time, and I've been involved in the drive to bring a major conference to the city next year around powering the knowledge economy. And I think that this is a theme that we need to focus on going forward, and as I say, a good point in time to bring together that triple helix that David was referring to. I've been asked to talk about universities as ambassadors to FDI attraction. And if we look at the broad drivers for a company, a multinational company that's looking to relocate or consolidate operations around the world, effectively you can boil it down to three major areas, and they're looking for access to markets, access to resource, or efficiencies, whether they be cost efficiencies or otherwise. If you take the US context, the US example, the UK is clearly a small market in comparison to the US market, to the domestic market. So in terms of location, in terms of access to those markets, if they've already decided that the UK is the right place to be, and particularly if they're in knowledge-driven businesses, really location becomes somewhat irrelevant, or at least they can locate more easily wherever they want within a country as small as the UK. So what that means is effectively the resource, the access to resource, becomes an absolutely crucial part of that equation. And so our universities have to be the biggest proponent of our armoury in terms of attracting those knowledge-driven businesses. But that's got to be built around world-class clusters, and I think it's been referred to already. So one of the things that we're doing in the city is, and we've already launched a couple of weeks ago, 6 economic zones around the city, which are aimed at, and based on the back of significant research that's been done over the last couple of years, aimed at bringing in investors from the target sectors, the subsectors that we're looking to attract based on existing strengths, and not some kind of blue sky aspiration to bring in something that just won't happen, because we have to be realistic about what we can win in the short and medium term. And I think that is absolutely crucial to the positioning of this city going forward, to put down a marker to say this is what we're good at, and this is what we can build around existing clusters to attract in businesses and like-minded expertise. But it's not just about putting in place the right environment for growth in terms of a site for these people to go. You need that. You need the planning, the simplified planning and other incentives. It has to be built around the softer elements of that package, the proposition as a whole, and clearly what's happening within the universities and the access to the talent that's already been referred to is part and parcel, if not one of the most important elements of that. And this includes responsive programs to the training and educational requirements of a company that is coming in. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. If you look at other examples around the world, and again the US model is a good one, I think, of clusters, successful clusters that have been built, as David said, over many years, they tend to focus around universities or educational institutions or groupings of educational institutions. Silicon Valley is the obvious one, around Stanford University, and clearly some of those major corporates that have led the brand of Silicon Valley are spin-outs from the university. Torrey Pines in San Diego, their life sciences cluster, again built around the Scripper Research Institute. And in Washington State, their aerospace cluster, built around very innovative model around a center of excellence for aerospace and advanced manufacturing, which incorporates 34 different colleges in the area that come together to work with industry. So you can see that model is a successful one. But if we look forward, if we look to the future in terms of growth markets and where our foreign direct investment will come from, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the US is still a very large proportion, around 40% of everything that comes into the UK. But based on our pipeline alone, China is now the 4th largest market for us, and at least 10% of what we do, and that grows month by month. The market entry for these companies has become very different. The days of large greenfield investment has pretty much gone away, and the preferred route, particularly for Chinese companies, is to work through an R&D base working with the universities, and to build on that, leading further down the line to production facilities. And you've seen that in Shanghai Automotive here in Birmingham, and clearly positive announcements around their reinvestment in that site and a doubling of the capacity. So research and development and the linkages to the excellent research universities that we have in the city is absolutely key. And I think it's worth pointing out that the UK is second only in OECD countries to the US in terms of attracting R&D from overseas. And that's a massive boon to the drive to attract inward investment. And 40% of R&D done in the universities is from the private sector is through inward investors, foreign direct investors. So we can use that, and we can use the capabilities in our world-class universities to build those world-class clusters, whether it be around life sciences, around the University of Birmingham, video gaming in BCU. The opportunity is there. And I think there's two more things that I just want to say to wrap up. We shouldn't forget the diversity of this city in attracting business. I found out leading up to this some very interesting statistics around the number of international students in our universities in the city. And whereas across the UK the average is 11% of all students in universities, here in this city it's around 20%. So almost double the UK average. So that's a very, very strong message to take to international markets. So we need to tap into that alumni better. We need to use the people that have come out of our universities and are now decision makers and business leaders around the world. And we need to use the networks that the universities have. David mentioned their operations in China. We have universities doing lots of very exciting things around the world. The city needs to formulate that around an international strategy, and that needs to be led by both the private sector and academia in terms of what we're doing. We need to better utilise the resource that we already have in different markets, which overlap very well with the markets that we're looking to target from a foreign direct investment perspective. But on the diversity and the international students piece, I was speaking to a gentleman from Xerox the other day. They have set up operations in Barcelona, and predominantly they're looking for multilingual skills, and those skills that they require are from Eastern Europe predominantly. What they're doing is attracting in the staff based on the quality of life in Barcelona. So they're actually pulling in talent. We have that talent here already, and we know that we have the quality of life. So there's a real opportunity there for Birmingham to shout louder about that. Finally, I'll leave it on a positive note. I think that what is happening in this city, and I previously did this job in London, what is happening in the city in terms of the alignment or the ambition to better align what academia, the private sector and the public sector are doing, it is absolutely exciting, and we're at a tipping point where we now need to make sure that what we're talking about actually happens. And I'll give you the example of we had yesterday about 20 chief executives and senior business leaders from US companies, including GlaxoSmithKline and IBM, in the city at a luncheon that we were hosting. And a lady from IBM sat through our presentation, and at the end of that she came up and said to us, I've been working with the Philippines, I've been working with Ireland, and I've been working with a number of different regions and countries around the world. And what you're presenting here and what you're doing in Birmingham is more exciting than anything else I've seen in the last 2 years. So I think we need to be G'd up by that, and I think we need to be positive. We just need to make sure it happens.
Well, that, I think, is great fodder for what will be an interesting discussion over the next 21 minutes. And Wouter, I'm intrigued that you ended on that point, because I didn't introduce myself, but I spent the first 11 years of my career at IBM helping them select locations around the world for laboratories, programming centers. And I can tell you, this was some time ago, 15, 20 years ago. But I would concur with that assessment. As somebody who spent a fair amount of time looking at what cities, what regions are doing to build a better future, the fundamentals of what's being done here are relatively unique. And you have that opportunity. It could go the other way. And I think the one strand that was through all three of your comments, the importance, and it was encouraging, the importance of partnership, collaboration, and trust, the triple helix, of the three sectors of the economy, of the citizens of this city. I'd be interested in your thoughts on where you stand today. I mean, David, Professor David, you made some very positive and encouraging comments about the current state of collaboration and partnership. On a scale of 1 to 10, where you are today versus where you were even 5 years ago and where you need to be, where would you say Birmingham is? And what do we need to do to improve that?
I think we've probably moved from about 5 to 7. And I think the presentation is good. I think Walter's right about that. I think delivery and execution are now very important. Because of time, I cut out the plea in my speech for light touch regulation. I think regulation really matters. I think it's at the moment insufficiently appreciated just how severe the competition for inward investment is. And those of you in the room who labour in these particular vineyards know it's one thing to put an exciting proposition. That gets you to the final stage of the beauty contest, as it were. But at that point, it's what can we deliver and how quickly can we deliver it. And I still think we're very slow on that. The other thing I think we talk a lot about but haven't yet delivered is around key aspects of the infrastructure. I mean, notably but not exclusively the digital infrastructure. And one of the things that I do wonder sometimes, and this is actually not just a comment about the city, it's actually a comment about our politics and public culture. I wonder whether our leaders get out enough. Because certainly when I'm in the Far East, I come back very frightened. Not for myself, but more for my kids, actually. And do enough people know the scale of investment, the pace of investment, the novelty of the infrastructure that our competitors are laying down? Now, some of that, of course, we can't fix just as a city region, but some of that we can fix as a city region. And so I think if we're going to go from 7 to 9 or 10, there are areas where we need to stop talking and start doing.
David, as a follow-up, and to put Wouter on the spot perhaps, although you are responsible for attracting investment, but what can Wouter's colleagues in the city council, do to make Birmingham more competitive on the global stage?
Well, I think continue what they're doing, but it needs to be based on successes. We need to celebrate the successes much more than we do. I mean, one of the biggest companies coming out of the university with the binding side. I mean, I'm from the biotech centre. I have been in this country. I've been in this city for over 2.5 years before I even came across the company. It's one of the huge successes of the UK, and yet Birmingham hadn't been celebrated. Now there was a combination of reasons for that, but the fact is it wasn't being celebrated. So celebrating success is important. I'm not talking about just award ceremonies and such like. I'm talking about finding the nucleating points around which things can serve. The success of the universities, yes, but the success of innovation is in its translation. So you need the successes of the businesses to be promoted much, much more.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how important that point is. If you look at some of the cities that Mercer ranks as the most successful, the most attractive in the world, cities like Vancouver, cities like Singapore, part of it is about civic pride. It's not just about the leadership, it's not just about the mayor, the vice chancellors, it's about the citizens of the city taking pride in the success that their city has created. And I think as an outsider visiting this city, one thing I'm always surprised by is the lack of that pride, the lack of, you hear it in this room this morning, but there seems to be a perception that Birmingham is punching below its weight, that it hasn't achieved.
There is part of a reason for that, is that sitting in Brindley Place, sitting in places in the university environment,
right,
there's 50% of the population of Birmingham that it's not relevant to. And the knowledge economy is actually an importer of jobs.
Right.
It's not necessarily creating jobs for the people of Birmingham who are unemployed. And that is something the skills agenda has got to address, not just these high-tech jobs. But if you want to make the feel of the place really work, 12.5% unemployment with hotspots of 30% has to change.
Yeah.
And that's something that will be driven by the successes of the knowledge economy, because it'll cascade down. But until that sort of thing happens, I think the glass half empty message that often comes out in Birmingham will persist.
Wouter?
Yeah, I think I agree with all of those comments, and the city probably needs to be better at engaging its population in those successes. I think we're probably not as good at communicating those to our own people within the city as we could be. If you take examples of places that are perceived to be doing very well, I mean, Dublin is you would think that there's a new major investment going in every week in terms of the way they celebrate it. And I think that it was interesting to hear the comments from the lady from IBM who basically said, you're actually ahead of the game compared to Ireland, but you wouldn't necessarily think it. And I think that what we've got to be careful of is what you mentioned, Bill, what you referred to, which is that there's a danger that it goes the other way. Because aspiration is one thing, but actually translating that into something achievable and actually relevant, I guess, is a different thing. So we've got to be sure that what we're trying to put in place, whether it's economic zones or other things, is best in class. Because we can build great infrastructure and we can put what we think is the right type of package together. But if it's not, if they're doing something better in Germany, or if they're doing something better in the US and the domestic market is keeping them there, then we're not going to win that investment. But I think the thing that hasn't been mentioned, and David touched on infrastructure, is the international connectivity of this city. The reality is, as well connected as we like to think the city is, when we compare ourselves to our peers, the international routes just aren't there yet. So the extension of the runway at the airport and what the airport are doing to try and attract in routes from those countries, in emerging markets is absolutely key to this. If there's one thing, high speed 2, yes, great, if it comes, and we hope it will. But the airport is absolutely the key driver now for us in terms of achieving more investment from growth markets.
I'm going to open it up in just 1 second for questions, so we'll have time for hopefully 4 or 5. I'd like to refer to a comment that was made last night over dinner, which I found amusing on one level and sad on another. I won't mention who made the comment, but that in marketing one of the 5 universities abroad, in marketing Birmingham, that the most clever thing they've done in recent times was to move Birmingham on the map closer to London. That both the challenge of living in the shadow of one of the world's Premier League cities, one of the top 2 or 3 cities in the world, is an opportunity, clearly, an opportunity to attract students, an opportunity to attract investment. But it surprised me, and if you look at the work done by the noted author and researcher Richard Florida about creating the Creative Class was the famous book that he wrote, and it was about what makes successful cities, the kind of talent, the kind of innovation and entrepreneurs they attract. The question I'd have to ask looking at London is, clearly that's a city which has that broad offer that attracts, whether it's students or faculty or skills, entrepreneurs to locate in that city. What is Birmingham doing on that score in terms of, there's airport infrastructure and then there's the softer infrastructure of what makes a city attractive to the kinds of people that can really generate growth?
It's always been my contention, and I lived in this city going back about 20 years, went away to places like Japan and then lived in London for a period of time. And it was always my contention coming back that what Birmingham still lacks to a degree, and it's getting better, is that sort of middle market between the high end and the sort of chains and mainstream of whether it be retail, leisure, restaurants or whatever, in terms of a wider appeal for its residents and people coming in from other parts of the UK. I think what's happening or being proposed around Digbeth and the Jewellery Quarter is very exciting. And the example I always point to is the sort of Clifton area of Bristol, which, you know, although small, has its very eclectic mix of bars, restaurants, and independent retailers. I think that there's an ambition that we do something similar. I think we can do it on a much bigger and more compelling scale, because, you know, having a conversation with some people in the audience before this, there's a lot that's under the skin in Birmingham, and, you know, if you look at the alternative music scene, actually we're one of the key parts of the UK industry in that respect, but it's all under the skin. And I think that whereas some of those industries might want to keep it to stay under the skin, we need to raise it above the parapet a little bit, and you know, I think there's some very exciting things potentially that we can do there in terms of the environment for people.
David, anything?
Well, I can give you a hard answer. 27% of our faculty are international faculty. So we're a big recruiter of skilled people from outside the UK. What are the sticking points? Well, some of them are generic UK sticking points, high cost of housing still. But the specific one, which sometimes is a stumbling block, is quality of education in the city. Think about that. So they look at schools, they want high quality schools. Do we have enough high quality schools? I mean, people in this room know the University of Birmingham is establishing a university training school as part of its contribution to driving up educational standards and attainment in the city. But that's probably one of the, and we haven't talked about it yet, but probably one of the things that if we want to attract more people to my business, then we need to do, and I suspect my business isn't very different from other high-end businesses there. And of course that links back to a point that David Hardman was making about skills in the city and other parts of the economy. That there is there a win-win actually, if we can continue to improve the standard of education attainment in the city.
David?
I think in terms of London, my concern is we have the government here this week because it's convenient. They go back down to London and then they promote London. You know, Tech City, we've just been talking about Jewellery Quarter, Digbeth and ourselves. Tech City, you know, the government is always talking about. Actually, Tech City is, in my view, largely a myth. And we have as good an activity here, but convincing government that is the case is an aspect that we've really got to do. So London, I think, is a threat at the moment, largely because everything goes to London. And we're quite close. And actually there is a danger there in that. We need to be, and it comes back to celebrate success, tell people about it, and actually people will decide, actually, well, maybe Birmingham is a better place to set up my business than this mythical tech city, for instance.
I'll give you one example. We had a Vancouver-based company, a company called Iogo, who are effectively a serious gaming company that work in the healthcare industry. They chose Birmingham over London because of all of the things that David just referred to. It was a direct head-to-head. So we are gaining traction in that area. And again, it sounds like a broken record, but we need to talk about the Iogos of the world and let people know that they're choosing Birmingham over other locations.
So we have a couple of questions. I'll take both of them and then we'll answer them together. First here.
John Kirk from Birmingham City University with the Faculty of Performance, Media and English. So we're part of some of that softer offer that the city has to provide. I don't know how many people here have been to Portland in Oxford. Yeah, that's a fairly cool city. And it's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's not San Francisco, and it's not even Vancouver. But I would say it was a very successful city, and there are some things that it's done that make it successful. Part of it is developing the cultural offer around places like Digbeth, their equivalent of Digbeth. It's also around walking, it's around cycling, it's making the city attractive.
Sustainability.
Yeah, and for the families of the investors too, because one of the problems Birmingham's got is, in the UK, you said, is that a cool city? Sorry to be crude about it, but people would say, not sure, or I feel really sorry for you, you're relocating to Birmingham. So that Digbeth Jewellery Quarter offer is absolutely essential because it's one of the things that differentiates us. You know, Manchester likes to think it's cool. So my question to you would be, what does the city council and the leaders of the city, people in this room, need to do to change that perception? That traditionally people came to Birmingham because it was full of clever people who could do things that nobody else could do. So that's why the investment came here in the first place. 200 years ago there was 10,000 people here. Now there's 1 million.
Great question.
So sorry, it's a long-winded one. But
Phil?
Just to summarise some of the comments from Phil at Massey University. We were talking last night about looking at the cities around the world that were not the number ones, not the Londons or the Madrid or wherever, but were the ones with the fastest growing trajectory of the knowledge economy in the last 5 years, not the last 50 years, where the industries were different. In the last 5 years, who are the ones that are really moving up that list, and what are they doing? The danger is we always go back to the Industrial Revolution and the history of Birmingham. It's the last 5 years about what are the cities doing that aren't the number one, because we aren't the number one city, that are moving fastest. And I think that the conference that we're talking about setting up next year, I think it would be really good to focus on.
That's a great point. So let's, any other questions before we turn it over to the panel? John's point, which I think is very interesting, that built on the conversation we were having at the end about what it takes to use Richard Florida's example of creative cities. What does it need to make Birmingham cool? And what can city leaders do? And it sounds like the jewelry quarter and Digbeth are a step in the right direction, but are there other things that are either in the pipeline or that you've done and you're not celebrating that can help position Birmingham as a place that creative class wants to be?
I'd say 3 things. One, with all respect to John, I think we should stop calling it the softer offer. And there's a kind of implied hierarchy there which isn't helpful. Creative and cultural businesses are central to modern economies. Let's just put them there, as it were, in the mix, and not offer a kind of genuflection to the wrong typology. That's the first thing. The second is, let's not talk about what we're going to do. We've just spent 5 minutes talking about what's going to happen in Digbeth, as if, that's the one missing link. Now, however you odds it, that's the wrong analysis. So actually the critical thing is to sell what we have, because what we have is more than good enough. And the third thing, because I was a historian when I had an honourable calling, I think there is one merit in going back to the history of Birmingham, which is this is a city that was not dependent. This was not a welfarist city. This was a city of people who did, of people who built. The city itself, the architecture of the city, the typology of the city is a monument to that. And we've lost something of that, actually. Though I do think that there are dangers in golden ages and there are dangers in past glories. But actually, if you're thinking about public culture, and if you're thinking about the political economy of the city, the political economy we used to have is actually the political economy which will work for us for the future. I grew up near Manchester. I'm a Manchester United supporter. I'm fed up with people in the city talking about Manchester. I don't see what it is. I mean, other than having a better football team, that Manchester's got going for it. I mean, I was a passionate supporter of the Halley Orchestra. The CPSO is at least as good as the Halley Orchestra, and Symphony Hall is a better acoustic than Bridgewater. Get over it, please.
That's great.
I would echo David's comments about Manchester. I mean, I studied in Manchester for 3 years, and I don't think it has as much to offer. The only time I talk about Manchester is to remind people that it's 3 times smaller than Birmingham. So I think that we've got to maintain that perspective. I think I'll sort of answer the 2 questions with a single example. I'm not sure that the city or the city council or any sort of public sector or associated body should be responsible for necessarily artificially generating cool within the city. I don't think you can do that. I think that you need to create the environment, and if you look at some of the things that you can do and some of the things that cities have done around the world, I've been doing a bit of work with Atos Origin around sort of the second-tier cities or even smaller cities that have reinvented themselves, and on a smaller scale, somewhere like Hamilton in North America is probably a fairly like example in terms of having a very industrial heritage and then that dying away and it finding itself in needing to completely reinvent itself. What they effectively did was to offer tax relief and premises, very low cost to artists. That they identified that in the surrounding area around Hamilton, and I'm talking about a very large surrounding area, there was a significant small clusters, but not in any specific area, of artists and creative industries. And so what they effectively did was put some levers in place in terms of the environment that they could access, and effectively they drew in that talent into the city. And they built their own premises, they built their own environment, and I think you've got to let that happen because you can't artificially create that for these kind of industries. So I don't think you can create cool. I think we've got plenty of it already. You need to give it a focus and then promote it. Yeah, absolutely.
David?
Cool's a trend, and if you, I get some interesting things at the moment where I've got it's for the games companies and such like. The cool place to be is in the leaky roof places in Digbeth as opposed to in the science park, because it's the cool place to be. The problem is for the city is that these cool dudes who are setting up these 1-2-man band will not change the economy of Birmingham. We've got to grow big businesses, not 1 to 5-man bands, 5 to 50-man bands. So we've got to link cool with a business infrastructure and support mechanism that really drives that growth in the centre. And in terms of the wider issue, let's look to history again. The thing that drove Birmingham in the past was the Lunar Society. A bunch of individuals, a bunch of leaders. And that is what we need to apply. We need to find that group again, could even be called the Lunar Society, that actually would drive those initiatives. And I think it happens with the individuals, not institutions.
Well, on that note, unfortunately, Martin, we have made it to 9 o'clock. And I apologize to those of you in the audience who still had a question. This was just a teaser of the event that we will be holding in Birmingham a year from this month on the subject of powering the knowledge economy, where we intend to bring the world thought leaders from business, thought leaders from other cities, thought leaders from the university community to look at what's happening, case studies, benchmark cities, and learn from each other. So I hope I'll see all of you there and maybe 2 or 3 times in between. Martin, any closing
No, I
comments?
just wanted to say thank you very much to the panel. If you could have just thank them in the usual way, that'd be much appreciated.